Hello. Hi, Los Angeles theater folks. I'm right on. Welcome Sunday morning. Welcome to our church. Yes. Really excited to see you all here. My name is Jessica Hanna. I am a LA-based artist who works with Outside In as an artistic associate, and put together this fabulous talk when I heard that the SITI company was, if anybody got to see their show last night, The Medium, yes, down at the Musico Center in Orange, and I found out, I was like, is Ann gonna be here? So, and then Ann's gonna be here, and then who would I love to hear Ann talk to in Los Angeles? Oh, Luis Alfaro. Personally, these are two artists that I deeply respect and have also been very inspiring to me over the years. And I think I have seen you both give talks, have talks, and I find the percolating that it leaves in my brain afterwards is very exciting. So I'm very excited that you all are here, here in this time of change in Los Angeles and for our community. So I'm really excited to have you both here, and I think I'm not going to do a big old like this is. I think you all know.
I don't
totally. But yeah, we'll have some talk, and then we'll have a chance for some Q&A at the end as well. So welcome, Ann Bogart and Luis Alfaro.
Hey, can I just say, I had a flashback walking in this room, because I remember coming in here in like 1988, and it was when the building was run by
Bill
Mr. Bushnell and Diane White. They were just opening it up, and they had a panel discussion on this stage, and I came in to listen to it, and I was looking. It was like, and I called it when I looked at it. I went, oh. Because there was a big, huge placard in the back that said AT&T, so I called in my mind the panel, 5 white men supported by AT&T. And they were sitting here, and they were sort of talking with each other, and then the guy who was the moderator, I think he was an AT&T guy, goes, well, I know why we're here, why are you here? I thought, oh my God, they were so arrogant. So I just want to start by thanking you for coming out on a Sunday.
Well, you know what's so weird just about history? So in the 80s,
yeah,
I did a play here 30 years ago called Bitter Homes and Gardens, the first play I wrote. Oh. And we had scenes in those little alcoves. And what I remember is there was Reza Abdoh's performance here.
Not in this room.
In this room.
Really?
Yeah.
Which show was that?
Boogeyman.
All right, I didn't
yes.
see that one, yeah.
I don't know if anybody was around during that period. So, yeah. Do you remember? It's so interesting to be here. So I got my equity card here.
Right.
I did a solo performance downstairs.
Hey, can I evoke another memory in this building? Because you talked about Reza Abdoh. I went to see, did anybody here see the hip hop waltz of Euripides? Anybody else? It was Reza Abdoh in all his glory in the bigger space in here.
That's right.
And there was Juliana Francis who played Orpheus, and a guy who played Eurydice with long hair who came, and she came in on a motorcycle, and there was a 15-foot dildo, and there was really loud music, and there was a capoeira chorus. I mean, it was the most out there thing I'd ever seen. I was really in your face, but I learned a huge lesson from it, which was at the end of it, I was sitting next to my then girlfriend, Tina Landau. We were sort of in love at the time, and at the end of it, I opened the program. I mean, this is this out there, in your face thing, and there was a little picture in the program of Orpheus and Eurydice with their heads tilted towards each other, and I looked at Tina and I said, "That's us." And I realized that the theater is about us. You know, that what I learned is that you could say, well, Reza's work was really technological. It was really out there. It was really loud. But what gave it resonance was this little fragile heartbeat at the center of it, which is why his work mattered, you know.
Absolutely.
Do you remember that show? Do you remember?
Well, I'm going to double down on that memory and that head because I dated Reza Abdoh. And off to a good start. So we had a very interesting
Oh my
chaste
God.
relationship because the whole company slept together in an apartment in Venice, right below David Schweitzer's apartment. And so we all slept in a line like this, and it was and we all ate together, and it was very communal, and it was very sweet. And every night, the person next to you would peck you on the cheek before you went to sleep. It was so. Oh. But can I say, just on behalf of Los Angeles, it's so amazing to have you here. And I was meditating about how much joy you've brought me over the years, and
God bless you.
Thinking about the Getty Villa performances. Not just that, but also I was meditating on a drive that I took to Seattle to see your James Joyce adaptation on the boards, I think it was, and then driving to the Cowell Theater at Fort Mason to see Bob, and then your opera that we were talking about, LA Opera.
The most hated opera they hated it so much that the reviews which came out when we did it, they reprinted them in the fall because they were so incendiary. And we hated this about it.
Wow. Yeah. We've all got those. We've all gotten those, right?
They're healthy.
Yeah, they're healthy. Critical thinking, the way critical thinking shapes the way you make work. I'm really intrigued today, this morning, with the notion of change.
Yeah.
We're in a great time of change and a great time of reevaluation. I'm feeling it really strong, and I'm just wondering, because now the company is at this very interesting moment of shift, transition, from production to, what do you call it? Do you call it foundation or archive? What are you thinking?
Well, it's all of that, but it's also a question mark. I mean, this is what happened. So City Company is 30 years old this year, which is amazing. And we got together 30 years ago, and we didn't expect it to last more than 10. 30 years later, we're still there. So about 5 years ago, we started asking the question, well, what's going to happen to City Company? And the question is, are we an institution, or are we a group of people who got together 30 years ago, and made something? And there was a lot of discussion, very emotional discussion. And at the end of it, because if we're an institution, it means bringing in new artistic directors, certainly diversifying the company, which is not diverse enough. A lot of changes, a lot more grant writing. We decided, no, we're a group of people who got together 30 years ago. And personally, I just didn't want us to turn into a bunch of old hippies trying to stay together. It just didn't interest me. Now, my dear company, who I love more than anything, would fight back if they were in the room. They'd shout at me right now because I would say I'm the most enthusiastic about this change. And it's very difficult because, yes, they don't know what they meaning the actors and the designers, not sure what their future is. And so they're trying to figure that out. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to make a transition in which if something else happens, it's possible. But COVID, I kept saying, okay, if we're gonna go, we should go out as a producing company, with joy, with a great acceleration. And then COVID happened to our acceleration. But one of the things that saved us is that we don't have real estate. I mean, we have an office and a studio in Midtown, which is now a deserted, horrible place, Midtown.
Yeah.
But we don't have a theater, and that allowed us to do the kind of grant writing and rescue money that could keep the company employed throughout COVID and making things, albeit digitally and otherwise. So I think it's a very tricky moment because change, you don't know what's going to happen. And the incredible management that we have with City Company, our executive director, our producer, have really worked hard to make it possible for it to become anything. Mm-hmm. And I would say the company themselves, even though they don't want to let it go, has not figured out what that entity will be. So it's a moment of, insecurity, which change is always with. I personally think that change is very healthy and painful and exciting, adventureful. And I don't want to turn into an old hippie. I mean, I am an old hippie, and I was at Woodstock. Thank you very much. So I guess I can't help but be an old hippie, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a little bit about there's been so much change that's also been imposed on us, right? Not a self-motivated change, too. But I'm thinking that when I started, in the world of poetry, which was all about change. All I did was travel around the country and sleep on people's floors. And so change all the time.
And sleep with Reza Abdo.
And sleep with Reza Abdo, yes. But then, when I got into performance art, that was really, for me, a very interesting place in terms of how to imagine that in order to do the work, you had to be full of inquiry. But that the work was constantly going to change in the moment.
Yeah.
So we had this word in our Scott Kelman. I don't know if anybody remembers Scott Kelman, Wallenboyd. So that was the place where I really got trained with John Fleck. And Scott would make us stand up on stage. You might let them like this for a half hour and do nothing. Yeah. Because in the act of doing nothing, you're always doing something, right? So this idea that there is going to be so much change. Right now there's so much change. That guy just raised his hand and that went there. Yeah, right? So there's things going on that you're aware of that are happening. And the electricity of that is the thing that's keeping this thing alive, right? How do you incorporate that into your life?
Exactly.
Enough to stay in the moment, because what I think we discount a lot in our culture right now is the wisdom. That's something I'm missing in a very big way. I was mentored, by Irene Fornes, and I miss the elders in my community.
But now, Luis, I have to say, just having heard of the season that you have programmed at the Taper, which sounds like the best season in a very, very long time. And if you say, right, I agree. If you say, where's the wisdom, I think I'm sitting right next to the wisdom. I mean, you've stepped...
but this is the thing
that... stepped into that role.
Yeah.
Which is why you should continue that role.
Well, thank you for that politic, Anne, but... I guess, this is the way I think about it a lot, and I wonder if you have a riff on this. I have thought for a long time, the one thing I am good at is I write plays. That's what I do. That's my thing, right? But this other part about in community, something is very, very possible. Today, the communal is making something very beautiful happen, right? That is the ancient thread.
Yeah.
And I have a role, all of us do, in the ancient thread. Irene, Scott Kelman, I could go through them, all the mentors, right? Jack Jackson, the Inner City Cultural Center. I could kind of trace it to my LA experience of building art. I am just part of a great tradition, a great ancient tradition. We're storytellers, right?
Yeah.
So this work, this investment that we do, when do we fall out of it? Which is a kind of interesting moment right now. When do we get back in? When are you leading? And when are you following? Yeah? And both of those are really, really important.
Well, you mentioned right now we're in a very particular moment. I've discovered a young philosopher, British guy, you might have heard of him, his name is William McAllister. And he just wrote a book called What Do You Owe the Future? And he's an extraordinary thinker and has some radical things to say. But one thing that sort of the most meat and potatoes thing that he says is that after a moment of change, which we're in a moment of change, you only have a finite period of time in which there is plasticity. And then everything goes boom, back into something solid, and we as human beings have trouble breaking that apart. So the issue is, and the tricky part is, that we are in that moment of plasticity. And so the responsibility that you took, for example, by programming a new season, that's actually doing something that could set up a pattern for a very long time. So it's not just any time, because we've lived through moments where it's really hard to change things and we complain a lot, but right now we're in this moment of absolute plasticity. And we have to understand that it's only going to last a certain amount of time. So what are we going to do about it? And what responsibility do we each take for that? You took a step.
Well, I came out of politics, right? So I worked for a union, and I was part of ACT UP, so I was around during the whole AIDS crisis. So for me, I always feel that my entire life and career has just been changing. I teach now because I don't feel like I need to teach. I feel that what I need to do is help others facilitate their journey towards their own excellence, right? But that is like a political idea. Mm-hmm. That is an idea about the world that I want to see, right? That I want to not make, but that I want to continue in some way. So I've been thinking a lot about this notion of how we do. The moment will fall, it gets ugly again, right?
Yep.
This Trumpian moment that we were in, right? Where you're just sort of sitting there watching.
We're not out of it.
We're not out of it at all. But just feeling the powerlessness of it to some degree. Yet, I feel like it was the most active moment I've had in a long time.
Yeah.
Our job is to respond, right?
Yeah.
So how do we keep responding when the world is changing around us? And how do we change our practice, which is, I think, the most exciting thing for me right now. How do you change your practice? Do you want to change your practice? Should it change? Must it change? And how do you, as a director, become a new director?
Well, every great question has exactly the same answer. No, it's true. And you just asked a really great question. And I don't mean to be dismissive, but ask it again and I'll give you the answer because it's a great question.
So how do you become that new director?
The answer is exactly. I mean, you never know, right? You have to walk into the room asking that question.
Yeah, yes.
You don't walk in and say, I'm going to be a new director by doing this. You say, how do you become a new director? That's the issue. But I will say, and maybe some in this room have heard me ad nauseum talk about it because it's the thing that I feel most passionate about, is that what distinguishes the theater, which is our business, as you say, I'm a playwright. I love that to hear you. It's like, that's what I do. I'm a director. That's what I do. That's where my passion is. But what is it that the theater does that no other art form does? And I have the answer, so don't worry. What distinguishes the theater from any other art form is it always asks the same question. And the question is, how are we getting along? That every great play that was ever written is about a social system that's screwed up and a bunch of people who are trying to find harmony from a state of imbalance. And they're trying to create a new social system. So you have, Oedipus sleeps with his mother and kills his father, and Thebes is a mess. And you watch people try to refine balance. Death of a Salesman is a family that's falling apart, and and they fail miserably.
Yes.
But the compassion, but it goes much, much further, which is that in a production, certainly for those who were out at Musco last night, the question is, how are the actors getting along? How is the audience getting along? How are the actors and the audience getting along? How can we get along better? So that every time you go into a rehearsal room, you are inventing a new social system. You're inventing a model society. I can't go out and tell the world how to be, but I can make a proposal by the way the actors are being together on the stage. So what I would propose is that every time you go to see a play, you're seeing two plays at the same time. You're seeing one with the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So you go, it's about, if you came out afterwards, you go, what's it about? Oh, it's about this guy who kills his father, sleeps with his mother, and Thebes is a mess. But there's another play that every audience is taken in that they can't quite articulate, which is on a deeper and more ancient part of the brain, which is how did we all get along? How were the actors being with each other? How were we with each other? I hate to quote David Mamet because I hate him. He says these really, really smart things, which makes me even madder. But he said, an audience always learns how to watch a play from each other.
Yeah.
And I think it's very true. So that issue is to create model societies that we then put on display and share as a proposal to how we might be together.
Yeah.
And that is the central question of the theater. So when you talk about change, I can walk into a room and say, how can I be a better director? But I'll do that, I have to do that all the time. And also not feel that I'm a very good one. I always feel that, I walk into the room, even with my company, it's like, they should hire a professional. What am I doing here? I could get somebody who really knows what they're doing. But that also is helpful. So change is indeed constant, as you say.
Yeah.
It's always change. But we are in a moment of very particular change. And how do we adjust to those changes is the question.
Yeah, I think about it in the great communal experience that we're having, right? That I always walk into a play when I'm writing is I'm wrestling with the question, a big question, right?
Yeah.
And it usually comes out of a fact. So my Oedipus was that, more than half of all young men in California state prison, 17 to 24, who have been in state prison will go back at least once in their lifetime, right?
Yeah.
More than half.
Yeah.
In Illinois, it's like 62%. So are those the new kingdoms? Right? So I always start with these questions, and then I have an idea that this question is not just a question, it's a problem that's sitting so deep inside of me.
Yeah.
That's making me so upset, and making me so emotional, and so obsessive, and so Mexican this way. Because now I'm wrestling with the thing that's really hard, which is this American brain, but this Mexican tongue. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm weeping, and I'm doing all that stuff, right? Change. I can't stop it, right? I cannot stop it. I can't let the moment go by, but I also don't know how to ride the moment, so I'm just filled with the inquiry of the moment, or the turbulence of the moment. And I say this word because a few days ago, when we asked, what do you want to talk about? You said, turbulence. I love that.
But can I just point out the way you just described your process? You took all this energy and you put it in there. And that's, the thing we don't talk about a lot, which is energy.
Yeah.
Which is, you can't fake that, and how do you put it into a container that's out of your body?
But this space right now, this activation of energy that's going on, but is also creating a lot of movement, right? It's creating a lot of electricity. I love that. I can't imagine, and it's just how I was raised as an artist, because I was I was in groups, like I belonged to a lot of ensembles and things of that sort, collectives. You built this thing together, right? The troubled waters, right? I remember many years ago during these damn glasses. Never buy these things from Facebook ads. It was the LA Festival, 1980s, and Bernice Johnson Regan, do you know who she is? The Sweet Honey in the Rock. And I got a few moments with her. We were talking, and at the time I was running something called the Gay Men of Color Consortium. And everybody in the Gay Men of Color Consortium hated each other. Like the Asians were fighting with the blacks were fighting, everybody was just hated each other. Because we were all digging for a very small pot of money.
Yeah.
So anyways, I was very troubled. I said to her, nobody in my group gets along. And I'm very troubled about it because we can't get to that utopian idea of how to make art.
Yeah.
And she said, if the coalition gets along, the coalition is not big enough.
Oh, that's great.
So I think about this in terms of the audience. If everybody in the audience loves you, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
If everybody in the audience is getting the same thing, we're in trouble. Because we're receiving it in very different ways, right? So that is something I'm wrestling with in a big way.
I think just before COVID I went, because I'm a Tony voter and I have to go to see a lot of Broadway shows, many of whom, at the end of it, I sit there like I'm from Mars. Everybody is standing and clapping, and it's like, really? Anyway, I went to see this. I won't say who directed it or which one it was, but the audience made the actors worse during it because they were they were loving the cheap things. So the actors got cheaper and cheaper, and by the end it was a display of cheapness.
Oh, wow.
And it was so distressing.
Yes.
And I remember once I did this show, Kaufman and Hart, takes place in Hollywood. What's it called? Once in a Lifetime. Thank you very much. At ART in Boston. And this wonderful actress, Christine Esterman, Esterbrook, who's an incredible comic actress, and she played the gossip columnist. I went away and came back for the final show, and I said, how's it been going? And she said, well, there's good audiences and there's bad audiences. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, there's audiences who laugh too long, and there's audiences who don't laugh long enough, and and that sensibility, I think, is really beautiful. And you and I were brought up in a period of fuck the audience, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And it's like, we're doing our shit, who cares what they think?
Yeah.
But then you look back at the era of Kaufman and Hart, or that time, what's that?
Buy your own art.
Buy your own art, yeah. That's a problem, though, that whole idea of the audience owning the art, which we'll get into maybe. But that in that time, if you read like Act 1, what that Moss Hart book, that wonderful book where they go to out-of-town tryouts, they pace, this is like in the 1920s, in the back of the theater, they listen to the audience, then they go to their hotel suites afterwards and rewrite the play based on the audience's timing. And I think we've come back to a time where that timing is really important. You know, the how are we breathing together? How do we create a rhythm together? How do we create a ceremony together? And that seems, in a time of turbulence, that seems one thing that seems key is the audience-actor relationship.
Yeah, you know, I'm thinking right now that the way I came up in the 80s was that, you know, because I came through performance art, I used to sit in the house before the show, and people would say like, I have never heard of this guy, or like my friend saw it and said it's awful, and then you would be like, oh, what are you doing here? Then, like, you know, but there would be these conversations you'd hear, right?
Yeah.
And every night I would do these performances. I called them these little burlesque pieces I did, and one is that I have a piece, a well-known piece that I did at the Smithsonian, I might add, where I drink a bottle of tequila and I'm naked.
For real?
Yeah. A whole bottle of tequila, and I try to keep the performance going. And so the audience
That's performance art.
That's performance art. But the thing that was interesting and wonderful about it, about all these crazy little rituals I used to do, is that they all fed into how to write a play. To not just surprise them, but every night nobody had the same response. And I have this story about being at the Hirshhorn Museum, and I had the bottle of tequila, and I used to do shots, right? And I'm doing shots, and then there's a woman in the front row, and she's weeping, and she's having a very direct response to my drinking, right? And so she keeps saying, stop. Like, and then she gets louder and louder, and she cries more and more, and she's kind of ruining my performance, but she's also making it better, right? She's bringing all the tension and everything to it. Anyway, so you finally can't take it anymore. She comes on stage and she grabs a bottle of tequila and walks off with it. But I, being a professional, have an extra understudy bottle of tequila that I bring out, and then she made it worse, right, for herself. And so it was very interesting, this engagement that I used to do with the audience, because it's the way I write a play. Something's going to shift tonight in the play. There is going to be a shift and a change. It has a logic. It doesn't seem like it does, but it's all built into what I call the half age of this play. Every character in my play, I do this exercise that was given to me by Mac Wellman, who I adore, has a half age. Right? And at that half age, something happened to you that determines how you move through the world today. So it's kind of my Law and Order trick, right? That person shot, but actually there's a whole history that we're not going to go backtrack into. Something about the surprise of logics that start to happen to audiences as they sit through a play, as they listen to you ask these questions, as they watch you wrestle, is a very communal experience, because now we're feeling this together, and I'm wrestling it with here, but I'm also dealing it with it here, and I'm really conscious of this, right? I don't know why I wanted to say
I'm
that.
stuck on the vodka.
Yeah, no, tequila.
Oh,
Tequila,
sorry.
yeah, tequila.
Came in as vodka.
I did a performance where I ate a box of Twinkies. I don't know if everybody saw it. You remember the Twinkie bit, right? Where I would eat, I had seen Dizzy Gillespie, the jazz performer, when he blows, you know, and I thought, oh, I have that much expansive space in here? And then I went to the library to see Chipmunk stored nuts, and I thought, I'm gonna try this with Twinkies. 7, 8, 9, right?
What do you remember about that show?
Oh, it's one of the most incredible performance art pieces, because it starts off and you watch him, the Twinkie disappears and everybody applauds, because it's just magical the way it disappears. And then it keeps going, and then it keeps going, and then it keeps going, and the audience is like holding on to each other going, please
Wow.
stop, please stop.
It's ceremony, it's ritual. So they egg you on. They egg you on at first, and then somewhere you ticked off something inside of them personally that they have as a marker for what is acceptable. Enough.
Yeah.
And then they scream back at you, and then the joy of it is they resent you. And then you have to get them back. You have to get them back.
And how do you do that?
I do it through the joy of language. So I'm a language artist, right? So for me, it's about how do I tell this story, not just from this, but from this.
Yeah.
Because this looks I've always been this. So people are looking at this in a very interesting way. So in my early days, I would take my clothes off and be in this. And
You're so radical.
Hardly. What I was doing was I was wrestling with 2 countries.
Yes.
I was wrestling with about 2 hours down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're Mexican and you're
Yes.
other way. Yeah.
I'm wrestling with both always. And then they start to shift and change. I'm wrestling with being queer
Yeah.
and being Mexican. I'm wrestling with being an American and being an artist. I'm wrestling with being in community and being outside of community.
So that sounds like turbulence to me. I would propose, based on what you just said, that perhaps without that wrestling, there'd be no art.
That's right. That's
so
right.
We're living in a moment which I think is very dangerous, which is we're living in a moment of backlash from liberation, meaning the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement. There's this like huge opening, and there's a human tendency to then shut things down and make rules because we want rules, as opposed to living in the uncertainty for a while.
Sure.
And but certainly, you know, as an artist, that you have to live in that turbulence. And there's a backswing. We were just talking about that. If you look at the history of revolutions, you look at the French Revolution, you look at Nicaragua, you look at the Russian Revolution, you have these revolutionaries who did extraordinary things, opened up culture, and then they were killed, like Meyerhold in Russia by the Bolsheviks, or Robespierre killing Danton in France. You know, you have this backlash of fundamentalism and a kind of right-wing hit back. So the turbulence is necessary.
Yeah.
To experience the pain of turbulence is necessary, not to accept the part of us that wants to shut it down and make it a single thing, to live in dichotomy. Should we open this up, Jessica? How are we doing?
Maybe just to say that also an added component here is living in joy.
Yeah,
right?
There's that.
Living in joy and enthusiasm. What a time to be alive,
Yeah.
right? What an extraordinary time to make work.
Yeah.
Always, it's the thing that when you're teaching, right, everybody feels so, that year on Zoom, oh my God, right? And I kept feeling like, hey, you're in your garage, or you're sitting in a car, wow, this is cool. What are you doing there? That kind of stuff. But how do I move through this world with the kind of enthusiasm towards still making the work? I never get bored with the work. You never get bored with the work.
Well, enthusiasm is an interesting word.
Yeah.
And we each know in here that you can't fake enthusiasm. That's really ugly. It feels awful. But you need enthusiasm. I once was. I have always admired architects because I like architecture, but I don't know that much about it. And I was once at a dinner party where I was introduced to a guy I thought he was introduced as an architect, and we got sat next to each other at dinner. And I turned to him, I said, "Oh my God, it's so great, you're an architect." And I started listing my favorite architects. And he looked a little embarrassed, and he said, I'm not an architect anymore. I said, "Why? Why did you get out?" He said, "Well, all those people you mentioned, they have something I don't." I said, "What?" He said, "Enthusiasm." And I realized that, it's true. Two things. One, the etymology of enthusiasm means to be filled with God, and theo, and that your job is to be enthusiastic, to be filled with God, a love of the art form. But of course, people won't, in architecture, which is very expensive, as is the theater, nobody's going to hire you as an architect unless you exude enthusiasm. You can't fake it, but you have to be filled with it, to be filled with God, to be filled with the love of the art form. And so enthusiasm is the key ingredient that's hard to talk about, needs to be cultivated, and the minute that you choose not to go in the direction of enthusiasm because you're trying to survive, for example, or make those decisions, you get shut down. You lose your enthusiasm, therefore you lose where it would become, as Gertrude Stein called, there's no there left.
Yeah.
So energy and enthusiasm, you have to cultivate, and it's hard. You can't teach that, can you?
No, I was thinking, so I was raised in a farm worker family, right? So when we were kids, during the summer, we'd go to Delano to pick grapes and cherries. And, it was never fun. My parents would say, "We're going on vacation." And you'd be like, "No, we're not." And I think about that a lot because I think about those early years of, my father had a thing, we all slept in this, we only had a one-room place in downtown. So we all slept together.
There's a theme with one room sleeping.
Yeah. And my father would wake up in the morning like this, and he would say, "It's a pleasure to labor and an honor to rest." Which is very, working class, right? But I love it. And, I wake up now every morning like that, and I always think that. I think, wow, what a pleasure to get up and go to work, to do work, right? To do play, to make things, right? And it's just connecting me to my architect experience was, so Anthony Burns, our friend, got married, right? And I sat across from Tom Main, the architect who's, and Tom said, the thing about the theater that really disturbs me is that there's always like one star, and he's like 19 years old of the season.
Right.
And he goes, and in the world of architecture, you don't kind of get there till about 60 and 70. And he goes, and then you make a choice.
Yeah.
Are you going to make your own work, or are you going to do the taller, right? Are you going to move the field forward and contribute to it that way? Which reminds me, this is, God bless Gordon Davidson, who was one of my mentors, but we were in a car once going to San Diego to see a show, and he goes, "I'm going to call my friend," right? He was always calling people on the thing, and they were always like, "Gina Rivera," and you'd be like, "Wow!" Right? But once it was the famous Disney Hall architect.
Gehry.
Yes.
Frank
Gehry. And he said, "Frank, how are you?" And he goes, "There's a building, and I have the dream of the building, but I don't have the structure. So it's a disaster." And they're kind of like talking it out, and then talking it out, and talking it out, and it's all in the structure. It's all in.
But that's so interesting with Gehry, because he did have the dream, but nobody knew how to realize it until computer technology got to a point where they could say, oh, yes, this thing you're describing, we can actually make it structural. So
Yes.
he did have the dream.
Isn't that interesting?
And then he sold out. Oh,
But you can make shape and form and all of that, right? And then you've got to, as in direction, right?
Yeah.
You've got to ground it in some way. You've
In
got to
a
make the
floor
environment.
plan,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Are we going to talk to the audience?
Yeah, let's go through here.
What a pleasure to be here with all of you today. It's such a joy. It's all these masked people, so you know.
I have to say, I just want to point out, Megan Wanless just walked in. Megan, I have to say this. Megan, this is a great story. I met Megan Wanless when she was would they call you an apprentice or an intern?
I was an intern.
Intern stage management at, you're going to hate me for this, Megan. She was an intern at Actors Theater of Louisville. And we were there doing a series of shows for this Modern Masters event. And we had this guy who I had appointed as stage manager who had no interest in being stage manager. It was like the beginning of SITI Company. And we were supposed to do the show, The Medium, right, Megan? It was The Medium, which we did last night. This is 30 years ago. And he hadn't taped the floor. And we had like important people coming to rehearsal in the rehearsal room. And I'm a very nice person. I started screaming at him for not having taped before. I said, you're embarrassing us. I don't do this often. You remember this, right, Megan?
No,
You didn't know you were coming here to become the center of this conversation. And then I look over my shoulder and there's this little girl on the floor, on her knees, taping the floor really fast. And I was yelling at Jason and I turn around to this girl, I say, hey you! Tell me if I'm telling this wrong. I said, do you want a job? She goes, yes. So a few days later, she walks up to me. It was Megan, of course. And she said she was an intern as a stage manager. She said, here's my resume.
That's the way to go.
So then she went on to be SITI Company's stage manager for 100 years, years and years. And she toured with us. She's the best calling stage manager. And then one day she said to me, Anne, we had just lost another managing director. She said, Anne, I've been taking management classes at night and I think I'm ready to be managing director. And I said, really? Really? She said, uh-huh. So I went to the board and they said, no, she's a stage manager. She's too young. We need a person who's really mature. I think I went back to you and I said, really? She said, yeah. So I went to the board and said, no, this is the person who should be our managing director. She became managing director for years, and then she became executive director. Very quietly, do you mind this? Are you okay, Megan? Then she squirreled away money. Like really, she's like mother hen. And when she left us to become, are you executive or managing director?
I'm managing director.
Here, she left us with a pot of money that has allowed us to actually end our 30th year with grace. I mean, still, and then our stage manager, our company stage manager, had a baby and couldn't take the medium on the road. And so after years, she's back and she stage managed last night. I sat next to her. Nobody calls a show like Megan Wanless. So even though you're a big wig now here in LA, that's the end of my story. I'm sorry, I had to do that.
So beautiful. What a beautiful testament to not only staying in it, but talk about change, right?
But she's a cornerstone, and she's the big honcho there. You're sitting in the shadow. I can't even see you. Okay.
You know, there's a movement right now in the American Regional Theater, right, of all these young artistic directors, right? We don't know if it's a good thing yet because they're all inheriting the financial woes of these theaters. But almost every, on 4 of these new artistic directors, I've been on the committee or the search committee or something, right? And somebody will say, oh no, they're like 30 years old, they can't.
Right.
And you know, I love this conversation because it's exactly this.
Yeah.
I keep saying, yeah, they can't run the theater you have. They're here to change it.
Yeah.
And to run a very different theater.
Yeah.
That's why you're hiring.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm thinking about this, how the beautiful notion of there's a moment of change, right?
I have to say, sorry, thank you for opening it up. Years ago, we were, thanks to Megan Wanless, who got us a Pew Charitable Trust grant. I went on a junket to a very fancy place in Terrytown for all the people who had gotten grants from the Pew Charitable Trust. And Gordon Davidson was there, and Robert Falls was there, and Mark Lamos, all the big wigs of the regional theaters. And I was in a conference room with them for a breakout conference, and at some point, Gordon Davidson says, yeah, we should just explode all our buildings, just blow them up. I said, what? And everybody, Bob Falls was going, yeah, the good, blow it up. It's not, I said, what do you mean? It's not working. This top-down thing is just not working. I said, what? Really? What do you propose? They should just blow it up. Gordon Davidson said, I said, what do you suggest we should do instead? And Gordon Davidson or Bob Falls said, cells. We should have cells in the building. Right? Which I think none of those people gave up their really high-paid artistic director jobs at all, and none of them blew down knocked down the buildings. But it's happening now, right? It's when you say that certain people coming in, 30-year-olds coming in, it's probably necessary. It's probably going to be really painful. But when they said the top-down thing isn't working, they were prescient.
Yeah.
The top-down thing isn't working.
The best lesson I got in American theater was when I first started the taper. I was there for 10 years, and then I left for 17, and I've just come back for a year, right? And I remember we had a play by Kia Corcoran. I don't know if anybody knows the great American writer, Kia Corcoran. She wrote a very hard play about African Americans and cloning, and it was called Slide, Glide, the Slippery Slope. June Carroll was the lead, and it was the first equity job for Valerie Curtis Newton, the director. Beautiful. Everything about it was great. Such a joy to produce. And nobody came. It was a science play. And our marketing department just kind of wrote it off. Mm-hmm. And we had this kind of come to Jesus meeting I'll never forget. And I was accusing all these people of ignoring the play. And I said, you just haven't found the right audience for the play. But there's an audience for this. And the marketing guy shot back and said, it's just a terrible play. Mm-hmm. And Gordon said, that's the thing about the nonprofit theater. I'll never forget this. He goes, it's not our job to sell the good play. It's our job to sell the hard play. Mm-hmm. So we have to sell the dud. How are you going to sell it? Mm-hmm. And the guy was furious. And that afternoon, he got on the phone with Caltech. He said, do you have any African-American employees? And they said, we have an association. And that was our first group. And then the word got out, and the word got out, and the word got out. And there was a group of science-minded individuals for whom this play
meant something
yeah. Very, very important. And for this playwright was, and I talk about this a lot, I always say that the joy of working in the theater is, I never want to work with the Pulitzer Prize. Like Lynn Nottage, I love her. I loved working with Lynn 6 plays before her Pulitzer. Mm. That's the investment we need to make.
2 Pulitzers.
2 Pulitzers, yeah, exactly. But that's the investment we need to make in the theater right now. Yeah. Is I want to invest in that writer who is on that part of the journey, right. On the play that's really, really hard.
Right.
We had a play last night. I'm doing this festival at the Kirk Douglas, right? Julie Taiwo Oni, Nigerian American from Bakersfield, talking about the trademarking of African culture. Mm-hmm. So fascinating. The play got so ugly and so scary that I keep describing it this way, it kind of worked its way down to singular words. The characters were in such violence that all they could say was, yo, nuance, responsibility. I mean, they were like screaming and they were, just one word responses. Primal, right? Oh my God. And I thought, how do I help this writer get this play produced?
Yeah.
This is the play of our moment. This is the play of the moment. I'm dying inside, but I'm smiling through COVID and all this other bullshit. But when I go home at night, I'm in my isolation. Binging on Succession and whatever else people, you know. But you know what I'm saying? I don't binge, but just to say, there's something so powerful about what the theater still gives us. This communal, even with the mask, is important, right? But also, how do we recreate our theater? How do we keep telling our stories, especially in this time, you know?
And on that note,
does anybody want to answer that?
Hi, my name is Sebastian, and I just wanted to, there was a discussion about the audience and good audiences, bad audiences. I just wonder what you think about the responsibility of an audience coming into a space. I feel like with COVID and with all the digital consumption, a lot of times audiences come in, and lately I feel like they come in and they want entertainment, and that they're not, I wonder about how they're engaging more deeply with the work. How do we, I don't know, can you just talk about that? Like, is there a responsibility? How do you prompt that? Or is the audience like a customer that's always right? And like that we kind of have to accept them, how they come in. Yeah, sorry, it's not a very clearly formed question, but I'm just wondering if you feel like...
well, I think one of the biggest problems that we have is the capitalist approach that I bought my ticket, it's expensive, so I own it. And the sense of ownership is a real issue.
Yeah.
But it's also real. And that's one issue. I mean, you have to look first at the problems, right? The other problem is the misconception, both by the fault of the theater community and the fault of media, is that the notion that there's a glass wall in between the stage and the audience. So these are problems we've inherited. But, you know, you mentioned, this is going to answer your question in a roundabout way. You mentioned you saw The Women at San Diego. Well, did this production of Claire Booth Luce's The Women and when actually the San Diego rep, when they called, said, Anne, what show do you want to do? I was thinking, well, it's in a mall in Southern California, so it can't be too heavy. It has to be sort of like light. But I love this play, The Women by Claire Booth Luce, because it's angry and funny, you know. And so I said I'd like to do The Women by Claire Booth Luce. And as I was telling you before, it's usually with a bunch of ditzes. And I decided each woman in it, there was like 16 actors, they each had to be able to play Medea, like no matter what they had. Anyway, we worked on it. It was really great. It was fantastic. The clothes were fantastic. It was a love fest. Second preview, we all know how horrible second previews are. Second preview, the audience didn't give anything. And I watched these amazing women in their incredible dresses, incredible text, and their beautiful staging, and their bravery, and nothing came back. I mean, nothing. And that night I had to get on a red-eye flight to New York, and I was going to come back 2 days later to get an award. Anyway, it was an Obie. Anyway, and so I got on the plane, and I was so depressed. And I thought, God damn it. Like, what do I have to do next? Harvey? Like, The Women is not entertaining enough? And then I started, and I was just beginning to start forming SITI Company, and I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to Saratoga Springs, and people are going to have to make pilgrimages to see my shows. Like, I'll find my audience. I'm going to find them, and they're going fuck them. They're going to come to me like there's an audience there, but I don't know who they are. But it's not these. Anyway, came back to San Diego. Fortunately, it was just a second preview, and all the other shows were wonderful, wonderful audiences. But I was really disturbed by my own reaction, and I kept thinking, oh, I'm elitist. You know, they're going to have to make pilgrimages to see my work. Then, fast forward, that summer was the first summer of SITI Company, and we were in Togamura, Japan, up in the mountains, and it was the first time I got to know Tadashi Suzuki, and we were just trying out this company idea, and we were rehearsing Chuck Mee's Orestes. And the actors were all trained in Suzuki training, and they also had worked with me, and one day we were to do our first run-through, and Tadashi Suzuki said at lunch, he asked if he could come watch a run-through. And I said, sure. Jesus, I'm a little nervous. We're not really ready. And so he padded in, and he had a translation of the play, and he mostly, looked at the play and looked at the stage. And I'm standing there, I'm not sitting. The actors are sweating. They did the worst run-through you've ever seen. They were like really upset. I was upset, and I just stood there going, I haven't fixed that, that's wrong, where have I been, what am I doing in rehearsal? At the end of it, Suzuki got up and he padded out, nicely. And I was so furious, and I went for a walk with Leon Inglesrud, who's at that time was a member of Suzuki's company and was his translator, and he now is SITI Company, and he speaks fluent Japanese, and he's a big Minnesotan with red hair. And anyway, we were walking. We took a walk. I said, I'm so angry. Why did everybody get so upset? Why did the actors get so upset? I'm really getting to your answer, I promise you. Why did I get so upset? And Leon said, well, the actors know how Suzuki is looking at them as an actor. And Suzuki will say in rehearsal, a professional will see this in your work. He's looking at them as a professional. And I had to think about that, and I went, wow, I'm an American, I'm a populist. I look from a different point of view. It's like Joe Schmo from Illinois gonna get it. I'm looking at the stage to make sure everybody gets it. Whereas he's looking from the point of view of a professional, which is elitist, you could say. What I learned from that is huge, which is you don't develop your own audience. You speak to a certain part of every audience. So within the first 5 minutes of a production, you are communicating to the audience what part of them you're asking to respond to. And some audiences will feel it and they won't want to go. When I mentioned earlier that Broadway show where the actors got worse and worse because the audience was responding to the lowest common denominator, like the worst sort of showbiz weasel stuff. But we don't have our own audience. We are speaking to a particular part of every audience, and they can feel it. They know what's being asked of them, and that's why I consider the theater as a gym for the soul, that it's a place you go to work out. But we have to very specifically, as theater people, is to know from what part of the audience we're asking. Like, sometimes you could just say simple things like laughing. Are you asking for a ha 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 ha? Or are you asking for a it's a very different kind of laugh. So it's easy to say, oh, the audience, they feel like they own the play, or oh, the audience, they feel they're watching it through a glass wall. But actually, what are we asking of each audience member? And some might get up and leave because they go, you know what, I'm just not in a space to do that right now. But we have to communicate that really clearly.
Yeah, I was just thinking, my early years of performance art, I would be backstage and I'd say, just be honest, be authentic, and be true. Yeah. That's all you can do, because that's what they want to have with you tonight, right? That's the only agreement I want to make with them.
And you make a communion with them.
A communion. Yeah. But I remember those early days of, so I do something in the theater that I get in trouble a lot for, but I really love it, which is I overwrite. And then I wait for previews to chisel away, which, for preview audiences, it drives them insane, right? But I was thinking of Electricidad at the Goodman Theater on the main stage. I had 9 previews. So I had a 2.5-hour play with the intermission, and then by opening, I had an 80-minute play, no intermission. Yeah. The joy of getting there, right? Some artistic directors are like, yes, and some are like, no, right? And I had this grant, because I work a lot at the Magic Theater in San Francisco. And this grant where they said you could get an extra week of performances or you could get 12 previews and only 1 week of performances.
Right.
Which I was like, yeah,
what
right?
you said, yeah.
Yeah, so, I wrote, that's where I wrote the Medea. And it was a 2.5-hour Medea with an intermission, and then it became 90 minutes. No, but the chiseling away every night in this collaboration with you, right? And then you're a different crowd tomorrow night, and we're doing less and less and pulling it, and what I love about that is that in a way, we're always making an agreement, right, with each other. But I love the response part of it, and I think this is another part that's very cultural for me. Many years ago, when I was at the Taper, I hosted the first, this almost seems silly, the first mariachi inside a music center theater in the history of the 40 years of the theaters.
Wow.
And I went to Esa-Pekka Solomon, God bless him, and I said, we should do this, because this is the classical music of Mexico. And he said, it's not. It's popular music. So I booked it at the Taper.
Yeah.
And it sold out in 7 minutes, and I added 7 shows.
Yeah.
And every show had tons of children running through the aisles, and people eating and yelling, and everybody on staff was freaking out, right? And the mariachi were having the time of their lives because it's a family event. Cut to, a few years ago, I went to see this musical Strange Loop off Broadway. That musical is about my body and about me and my sexuality. That's my show. And the audience is going, ah! Ah! Oh! Yeah! Right? And then there's a part where they say, sing with us. You're just, all of that stuff is happening. And you're like, that's a mariachi show. That's a mariachi show. I don't know how it registers on Broadway. But
The audiences go crazy.
something about that moment, seeing that when I first started like that, made me think, that is the relationship I want to have with you tonight. I am going through a very hard thing, a question I'm wrestling. And I want to negotiate that with you tonight as an audience.
But that goes back to the Reza Abdo thing we were talking about of That's Us.
Yes.
It's like that, I think in Strange Loop, that's a lot of the response is, oh, that's us on stage. And how do we create that sense of that's us as opposed to that's some foreign something or other?
And how is us always them?
Yeah.
See, this is a question. So when I did Electricity at the Taper, the first week of previews, in the first 5 minutes, people would leave. Lisa Peterson directed it. And she did this address where somebody would get up and say, my name is Agamemnon, right? But the Latino version of it. And I am the leader of the House of Atridas, right? And then people in the audience would say, I don't want to spend the night with these people.
Yeah.
And they would leave in the first 5 minutes. And Gordon would be outside and say, why are you leaving? I have nothing to do with gang culture, right? As if it was just about gang culture, right? I love that in a way because it was like the contract from that first moment. That's not your audience, right?
Yeah.
But I love those moments when the audience would say, yes, okay, all right, here we go, let's go, right? I love that, and I do think the ceremony that happens before a play, as I've seen in every single one of your productions,
Yeah.
the preset, the first moment of Ellen getting into place is a performance in itself, right?
She's amidst the audience.
You are making a pre-performance.
Yeah.
You're making a ritual, a ceremony. You're doing something that is saying, are you all in on this tonight?
Yeah.
This is the rhythm of this. This is the electricity of this. This is the way we're riding this wave. Yeah? I am fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by that because we do it without language.
Yeah.
And that makes me very excited that we can still connect this way. And feeling. I'm feeling a lot right now. I'm feeling very in my feelings, right? My heart is very full to be with you and to be with all of you. But I hope that that's what we're connecting with right now. I feel like I haven't been with you for a long time. I've missed you. I feel that very strongly right now in this moment. It just hit me. I've missed these people a lot. I've missed this moment a lot.
Going back to your question, though, I wonder if you here's something I have no solution for, which is I was on a small panel at the Cherry Lane and we opened it up, and this girl, it was about the necessity of theater, based on, it was the guy who wrote the book called The Necessity of Theater, great book, Paul Woodruff. We opened it up, and this young woman said, "Me and my friends don't like to go to theater because we don't want to be out of touch with our friends for 2 hours." Now, I don't have any solution to that, and I wonder if anybody does.
That's hilarious.
Well, I'm glad you're laughing.
Well, I want to be away from my friends for longer than that. Right? That's hilarious.
But I think she's not alone in saying that.
I
The
ban
idea of
these,
not
right?
being-
I ban these in my class.
Yeah.
And, the jonesing that goes on. I have to keep mine on because in case something goes, well, what would go wrong? Well, I have a condition. What's your condition? Let's talk about it. You don't need this. If you can't sit in here for 2 hours without an hour and 50 without this, we can't do it. We can't do the play.
But does anybody have a solution to that problem? Or some way of addressing that?
The phones or the inter-friend?
Well, they go together, don't they? Right? I mean, she's saying, I can't turn off my phone for 2 hours. Can't do it. So do you say, okay, this is now a Twitter-invited event? Which happens a lot,
Yeah, totally. I mean, the thing that people are doing out there is interesting, right? Being in church is really, really important. The sanctified space is really important, and I think it's. I miss breathing with people. I miss just being in emotional space, and this gets in the way of that.
Man, I got in such trouble because before COVID, I always said the definition of theater is breathing common air. Suddenly,
Look what you did.
dangerous. Dangerous to do.
Before I forget.
But you call it church, and I do too.
Yeah.
But going back to your question, a lot of people don't want to go to church, or
Yeah.
church is scary. I don't know.
Well, we've lost the ritual of church, right? We've lost the meaning of church. It's so funny because my mother has dementia. So I spent Sundays with my mother, for instance, a lot. And she just stopped going to church.
Yeah.
And so at first it was like, And then she was like, well, church is definitely now in my 80s, is not the building. That's not where I'm finding my
That's not the
spirituality.
building, right? That's it.
Right?
Twitter.
What?
It's on Twitter.
But you know what? Twitter is the angry space, right? I love the social media. I post my 1,000-word essay on Facebook, and then I reduce it to 350 words on Instagram, and then I reduce it to 50 words on Twitter. I love it, and they're all like these. I stay totally positive. I've never in my career ever talked shit about anybody in public, ever. There's enough people in our industry that do that, right? I love it. But in this space, it's really hard to do this, right? It's hard to connect in this way. So I am eager to not lose that part of ourselves with each other. I find myself getting farther and farther away from design.
Yeah.
I don't know if you do, but I pull away from it.
Absolutely. Like, what does that mean? You're decorating a space?
Before I forget, though, the last time you were in LA, you said, or you were on Zoom, you said something very amazing about the holy triptych, I call it, of the theater, which is passion, point of view.
It actually was something that Bob Brustein said at one point. It was so brilliant. He said, the thing you need for theater are three things. And if you're missing one of them, I think of it like a milking stool, like if you're missing one of the legs, it falls over. You need passion, you need technique, and you need to have something to say. Those three, and without one of them, there's no there in your work. And I think it's so simple and so basic.
Yeah.
And the passion goes back to the entheo, enthusiasm. Passion, a technique, and you have to have something to say. And if you're missing one,
Well, it was interesting because your thesis, which I really loved, was passion, yes, very passionate people right now, a lot to say, but we might have run away from the craft technique.
there's an issue there, isn't there?
I'm very intrigued by that.
Yeah.
I'm very.
We were opening this up and we got.
Yes. Yes. Now the hands are all going up.
Jessica Hanna.
Thank you so much for such a heartfelt and lovely conversation. I read come across by accident your last blog, Seeding Plants, and very personally affected me in the simplest ways, like the light bulb went on. I've been thinking about 10 years ago when I took the Saratoga workshop, and I look back and I'm like, man, if I knew what I know now, I'll go back and I would look for something different. I would be so focused internally and not see what all of your members, everybody were trying to teach us out of like, I think 80 people to 4 directors. It was such a privilege to start my creative world with that workshop. And so I have a personal question. I want to know if you have to give one advice for the next year. So I don't look back, or a lot of people look back and say, man, I wish somebody would have told me that. Or maybe they did and I didn't listen. But now that there's openness about it in my own creative work, what that advice would be for someone that's actually kind of thinking, understanding life, finally, after 40 years?
But there's not really only one piece of advice, but it gets complicated, which is be courageous. Now, why are we not courageous? Because we think, well, I don't have the answer, or I'll feel bad if I fail. So it also means get over yourself. Like what it is to look at the barriers to being courageous. What is a courageous act? And you can practice courage not just when the big things come up, but in every moment. How do you practice courage in whatever that is? So you can practice it in micro habits to lead you to be. You can't just suddenly be courageous, but you can certainly practice courage. I hope that's helpful.
Very much.
But it would say, get over yourself.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
We've been putting these plays together, these 10 plays, and for the last rewrite, they were all like, "What? Okay, give me something technical." It said, "Be brave."
Yeah.
This is the moment to be brave, because this is the editing moment. This is the moment where you have to really
Kill
look.
your darlings.
That's right. Be brave. Be courageous. I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
We go on this side and went over.
Poor Jessica has to climb these she's got to climb the steepest stairs ever.
I love it. Like she said, thank you so much for being here. It was what a fascinating conversation. I just did a 20-minute presentation on you, Anne, for class.
How'd it go?
I got all the 10 points that it was. Then I just read Electricidad for the first time, and oh my God, I'm so excited to read more of your work. I love your use of Spanglish. At the end of reading it, I felt like I could have been a cello in another life. My question is more towards Luis. You were talking about how you had to run Electricidad 7 or 8 times and chisel away at it. How are you facilitating getting that energy or that feedback from the audience to know what to cut, what to keep, or what to edit, especially if audiences are so different every night? And when do you know this is the final piece, this is it?
God, this is such a good question, because I'm thinking about it from the director's point of view, which is, every night, for instance, at the Goodman, there was a communal agreement, and that didn't change. The specifics of how people respond is one thing, but there's a kind of collective response that happens when you hit that. In Medea, there's a moment, right? In my Medea, the big moment is he says, I married her. I married the Creon, right? And the audience goes, right? And it's such an interesting question now, because I'm doing these modern adaptations of these Greek classics, and none of the people who go know the Greek classics. So, there's like my favorite moment now in Oedipus is when he goes, well, if he's my father, she's my, and the entire audience goes, wow! And you're like, really, folks? Really? Right? So anyway, I'm thinking a lot about how that agreement happens every night. But I think what's really, really important is, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this, Anne, because it's, I'm listening very closely to the one heartbeat of the audience, the communal expression, the energy. It's a different audience each night, but I'm listening for the one big overriding thought, feeling.
But it's also breath. You just said
Breath.
and you can tell when an audience is not breathing right. And I think that cutting, you have to listen and be embarrassed by your own mistakes,
Yeah.
and be enough outside of yourself to hear what has to happen. So,
What's so weird is, so I'm working on Search for Signs of Intelligent Life in the Universe, right? The Lily Tomlin, Jane Wagner piece, right? And which opens in like a week or two. And it's a classic piece written 40 years ago that speaks to the moment now. But she has two thoughts at the first 3 to 5 minutes of this play about being homeless and being crazy. And they don't fly now.
wow.
They don't fly now. And so we were talking a lot about that, just the response of everybody who's heard it, who's like, so this piece has to change. It has to respond to the moment. And it's been fascinating. I was telling, and one of the joys of my life is working with these two women. Lily Tomlin's 83 and Jane Wagner's 87. So they write their notes on yellow pad, take a picture of it, and then send it to me in an email. And then I'm supposed to walk it over to the person on stage, right? Like, they're hilarious, right? But one of the things I love about it is that it's true. Everything changes, right? And you have to change with that moment. So they're just listening to those two thoughts that are very much about, you cannot do Search at the Taper and not talk about the unhoused in LA. Because every single person who's driving to the Taper is going to pass somebody who's unhoused. And you cannot talk about mental health the same way. You cannot be dismissive the way you used to be that way, right? Isn't that fascinating? So that agreement with the audience, the play itself, as it moves along, it's beautiful. A look at feminism, the history of feminism, what happened. But those first 3 to 5 minutes, they don't breathe well. And if you don't get them breathing well in the first 3 to 5 minutes, they don't breathe with you. They don't trust you. They don't believe you. You didn't go into the marriage properly.
Yeah.
Now, how do you facilitate chipping away at it, though? If it opens in about a week or so, will you sit amongst the audience for the first weekend? And then, like, that, I guess that's really more of my question, is how do you implement yourself after it's already been released?
I think of it like the way the director, the way I've seen you work, right? You're shifting and shaping the piece in process. I love that. I'm doing this tonight with you. I'm shifting and changing tonight with you. And that's really, really important. I don't go and do it by myself.
Right.
I'm in the theater, I'm that little weirdo in the back, and I'm doing that. I remember, I was going to say, how many of you saw the Uncle Vanya that was just recent? Yeah. The Hugo Armstrong, one of the most amazing performances. But there is a moment in that Uncle Vanya, they took out the first few rows, and they really leaned it in, and poor Vanya,
What do you mean they leaned it in?
they leaned the set down, so it's like it really tried to connect that at the Pasadena Playhouse, because it always feels so cold and distant. But anyway, there's a moment where he breaks down and he's out of control, and the actor just rides that wave for a long time. And I was broken down and out of control with him because I was really worried for him, and I was feeling what he was feeling, all of it, right? But there was a really fascinating thing about it. I thought it was one of the great negotiations with the audience. I am going to cry right now. I am so full of this. Will anybody stand with me in this moment? Will you, please, please, please? I am so vulnerable. I am so broken. I am so heartbroken. And I cannot control my feelings. Will you please, please do this with me in this moment? And I was thinking, I did a one-man show called St. Jude about my father's death. And at the end of that show, Che Yu, who is the hardest director I've ever worked with, got rid of the stage lights. We did in the fluorescence with the windows open and everything. At the end of that play, I do something very specific. I just stood because my leg hurts. My father dies, as he did in real life. So I was really working from the story of how my father died. And I did not know, because all my life I'd been raised watching movies where people died, and they don't die like this, right? Like they do in movies. They die like this. They take one last breath, and it goes out. So my father died like this. Gone. And then I was the only one in the room, so I cleaned up my father. I did my Mexican, rituals. I went way back to my indigenousness, all of it, Michoacan. And then I brought my family in. And so I start crying, and I just start weeping in front of the audience. And Trey says, just keep weeping till somebody does something. And shockingly, I did 32 shows in Chicago. Every night, one person never failed to go or tissue. Somebody ended the performance after 4 or 5 very painful moments of watching me weep until somebody did something. The agreement was with you. What are you going to do? And then one night, 5 people came up and just tugged me. And there's no difference in light. So at a certain point, it just ends. And then I did it here, and there was a line every night, so I had an extra equity pay, because I would stand out there and people would give me funeral cards from their own families who had died. Wow. That's the agreement. That's the agreement, right? That's what we're doing every night. I'm shaping it with you.
But you have to make that agreement as part of the production.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And where does that happen?
Well, I think it happens in your first few moments, right?
Yeah.
It's how you start this relationship. Somebody said something to me very, very important in the theater that I always took many years ago at primary stages. What was that guy, Seth?
Yeah.
Anyway, he said, passion, not every relationship starts in passion. Passion grows sometimes. And I always think about that. Not every relationship with an audience starts in love.
No.
But you get there.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, this is a question in terms of performance and coming from the craft of acting. So I'm asking in terms of as an actor and as an educator, because I teach acting as well. In this world of self-tapes, in this world of teaching on Zoom, also the access to so much information through different crafts, watching a play on TV, do you feel there is a universal definition of what we call a method? There's been several podcasts about actors speaking about it, and also a recent documentary on HBO with Ethan Hawke. Do either of you feel that that's a concern for teaching acting these days? Is it a concern for the actor to know what the method is? Is there a universal definition for it?
All there is the human desire to make rules. There are so many different definitions of the method. I mean, even the birth of the method certainly comes from a misunderstanding of Stanislavski, which he later said. So the question is, what method? Or I remember years ago down in San Diego, I was doing a workshop in viewpoints. It's like nobody knew it. I started by saying, has anybody here had any viewpoints training? And this guy raised his hand. He said, is that thing where there's no face and no emotions? And I wanted to slit my wrist. No. the assumptions, certainly about the method, although that new book on the method is so fantastic. What is the name of the book? It's so good. It's
called
The Method.
Yeah.
It is beautifully written, and it's a history lesson of like how it happened, how it changed culture. So it's massively important to understand, not to make rules out of it, but to understand what one's background is, where we're coming from, what it is that those actors were doing that now give us more permission to have a wider way to act. As opposed to this is the way you act. I think of something like Stanford Meisner, right? Sometimes there's a horrible thing that happens. You see somebody who's had Meisner training, and they won't do anything until they feel it, right? But they've misunderstood Meisner. Meisner would never say that. But they'll say, well, the rule is until I feel it, I won't do anything. I don't believe that's what Stanford Meisner was doing in the training. So is the training shutting down your options, or is it opening up your options? So to study in the method, I know when I was a young director, I taught much too young to teach at the experimental theater wing at NYU. I was much too young to teach. I just said, I'll make things. But what was wonderful then, and is not true now, that ETW, Experimental Theater Wing, at that time they only took, this was an undergraduate program, they only took actors who had already gone through Strasberg or Adler, so that they had the basics. And then they could come to ETW and sort of blow it out. Now, they'll take anybody, freshman year, and I think that they were right before. Like, get some fucking technique. We were talking about technique before. Get some technique, know your options, try things out, then blow it out. You don't start by blowing it out. So I think an understanding of the method is complicated but fascinating, to look at the history of it and how people made choices, because all of those gals and guys who were very binary in those days, how they all took, certainly how Strasberg took his understanding of Stanislavski, and how Stella Adler took it, how Bobby Lewis took it, how Meisner took it, are all vastly different and completely fascinating. And they would be arguing, if they were all alive today, they'd sit up here on a panel and they would scream at each other because they totally disagree. But from each one of them, there's a kernel of great, useful information to how to act better, how to be more connected. There's technique in each one of them. But to turn that technique or one of them into a religion is a problem. But as human beings, we have that proclivity. We want the answer. We want to say the Bible is what it is, and that's all that it is, or only the Old Testament, only the New Testament. And we have to recognize that each of us wants those answers, but how to bypass that. So
it won't backfire on us.
It backfires on us, definitely. 100%, yeah.
I think we've got time for one more.
Thank you.
Larry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go to the other side.
Thanks for the question.
Do you want to do it with that mic?
I'll try.
Get it.
Let me know. I'm wondering, someone worded it really well, that particularly among my students, but I think it's true of audience as well, that there's a conflation or confusion between being triggered and being uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And I'm wondering how you're negotiating that and how you're giving people permission to be uncomfortable. I mean, I view it as triggered means I cannot control my reaction to this, which I think is fair. But I'm also noticing theaters where the box office has a long list of everything that's going to happen in the show, lest you're upset about it, you know. And I've actually, in my directing classes, I actually now, like, you have to take care of yourself. So I make my directors give their trigger warnings, but they put it online. And if you feel you might be triggered, you go look for it. You have to take care of yourself. I don't want to know. So I'm trying to find solutions to let people take care of themselves, but also to keep inviting discomfort, keep allowing discomfort in the theater. And I'm wondering how you.
God, that's such a great solution to put it online. I'm married to a woman who lost a child, and she'll never be okay about it. Never. And he was 15 when he died. She'll never be fine. She'll never wake up and it's okay. It's never okay. And she loves the theater, and she gets so angry if she didn't know that there's a portrayal of a child dying. Like, she gets so pissed, and she's always saying, why didn't they tell me? So as much as I want to poo-poo trigger warnings, she just wants there to be a website where she can go on and make sure she's not going to get freaked out when she goes to the theater, because she loves the theater. So it's such a great question. Maybe Louise has an answer.
we were just wrestling with this. Let's be transparent, because I just started teaching again after like a year away, and the first day a student said, your class isn't going to have any triggered plays, right, that are going to upset me. And I said, well, yeah, there's going to be a ton. In fact, we open with mud every semester. So like I'm setting the tone, right? But in the syllabi I say, theater's dangerous, theater's hard, and I don't want to warn you, because I don't think that's what this class is about. If it's another, like maybe a directing class, then I want to tell you what's coming up. But I'm taking you on a journey this semester, and on the journey, we're going to go, for instance, to Chile with Carmen Aguirre, the Canadian-Chilean playwright, whose both of his parents were tortured during the Pinochet period. I need for you to understand what happened in Latin America not that long ago. The playwright is still alive. And her father was killed in a stadium. He was tortured. And her mother's breasts were cut off by soldiers. We got to deal with that. We got to deal with that in this play. That's what she's wrestling with in this play. And it's going to lead us on a journey towards joy and fulfillment and humor and lots of things, but also how dangerous and hard the world is too. And I can't run away from history. So how do I do this with you, right? I want to do this with you. Everything is triggering right now, right? Everything is hard. I remember I tried during the pandemic to do all funny, nice, sweet. And then it was like, what the hell? We're not getting anywhere. It was fun, but it was also like not honest. It wasn't true. It wasn't authentic to the experience we needed to have. So somewhere in the middle there, I don't even like this play, but I put in Ariel Dorfman's Death in the Maiden.
Yeah.
And a student read the triggering assault scene, right? My rape, right? And it set in motion the excellence of that class. We had to go through it together. We had to make community. I make community. I make community every class. I make community in my company, right? I make community in a play. It's not surprise to me, this is so weird, but my very first teacher, Rose Portillo, the great actress, is sitting there, that I started as a child with this actress who was the original lead in Zoot Suit. She's sitting right there. And you know what she did? The first thing, I still remember it, I was a kid. We made community. We started by making community. And in community, we can all go down the rabbit hole together. In community, we could all see the light together. But we have to travel. And these are really hard times to travel. We read a piece the other day, Karen Zacharias, it's beautiful, funny telenovela piece. It's called Destiny of Desire. It's just a satire of like soap operas. Oh my God, one of the most serious pieces I've read. It's Brechtian, it's playing with these big ideas. And as you're watching this ridiculous acting go by, somebody walks by with a little board, and it says, soap operas are ways that countries control you. Right? Like there's these notes going by, and the students would go like, right? I love that. I also think that this is the time to be brave, to demand bravery of the student, right? I don't know that this moment is gonna, I'm anxious. I was just telling Anne, I just got over COVID. I never thought it was gonna happen to me. I really suffered a lot through it, but it's made me more willing to jump off the cliff, to walk through fire, to get back into the theater. What I have realized is we've been doing a lot of bullshit work, right? In this moment. I've got to get back in it in a very real way. So I'm doing a play at the Magic, and we're having this really hard conversation because I have a nude character. When was nudity an issue? I love nudity on stage, but he's 14 years old. It's freaking everybody out. It's really freaking everybody out. But it's not that I need to have it, I need to have the conversation. Why is this scaring you so much?
Yeah.
It's illegal.
Well, it's not just about that. It's about what we do to young people in our culture and in our country, right? Mm-hmm. It is about the way we sexualize people. It can't just be about the rule. What is making this happen, right? So all of a sudden you're having these kind of conversations. That's what I love about the theater. Your job, my job, is to break it down, to have the conversation. I'm not sure we're talking. Maybe that's what's been so hard. We haven't talked for a long time. Do you feel that?
You know, I love the etymology of conversation, which I know we're ending, so maybe it's a good... I love you also saying the way to deal with this question is through creating community and going down the road together. But the etymology of conversation, converse, means to turn together, converse. And that a good conversation is one in which you end up sitting in the opposite seat,
right.
you know. And I think we do need that converse, as opposed to debating or to standing up for what you think is true, but to converse, to turn together, has been missing because we haven't been together. So,
you know, they're working on these 10 plays. None of them are finished. They're really just at the first step, right?
Yeah.
The first draft. And what I love is there's no ending. There's only catharsis.
and you know the etymology of catharsis.
What is it?
In some ways, some people say it's true, catharsis is to shed light in dark places. Kapha is like a cathode ray. Some people might disagree with this etymology, but I particularly like it. This is what we're doing, is putting light in dark places.
Well, you do that so beautifully in your work. It's such a pleasure to be in this room with you.
Thank you to Jessica for
Thank you to
organizing.
Jessica.